Coming up, an overdue apology from the Academy, an update on voter suppression, and states are acting on missing and murdered Indigenous relatives. Plus, meet this year's Miss Navajo. I am Aaliyah Chavez. Join us for those interviews, plus headlines from the ICT Newscast.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.
Arizona State University welcomes 3,500 Indigenous students from Arizona and across the nation. It serves one of the largest populations of Indigenous students among U.S. colleges and universities. We created a sense of place for tribal nations to create futures of their own making through community outreach and research, taught by world-class Indigenous faculty where they see a reflection of themselves and their experiences. Find community at ASU.
This is the ICT Newscast with Aaliyah Chavez.
Amadawa Hopa, thank you for joining us. The FBI has released new data this week about Native people who are missing in a key geographic region. The latest list by the federal agency shows 183 Indigenous people who are missing from the state of New Mexico and the Navajo Nation. This is the second update of the FBI's list that was first released in July. As of September 13th, the data shows there are 115 males and 68 females missing. The FBI says it is actively checking numerous law enforcement databases to identify leads on these missing people. This, of course, comes as Indigenous leaders have already been outspoken about the crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous relatives. The median age for those Indigenous people who have gone missing is 35 for males and age 25 for females. In Canada, there are new efforts towards advancing education in the Yukon. The First Nations School Board, which has been in development for the last few years, became fully operational at the end of August. APTN's Sarah Connors reports.
Using a little bit of glue and a whole lot of moss, these grade 6 and 7 students at Takini Elementary in Whitehorse are getting hands-on learning about the land they live on. For the last 2 weeks, they've been building birdhouses with materials used from nature. So far, the activity has been a hit with students.
Really fun, honestly. I really like just, putting random things on it. So, yeah.
It was really fun.
It was so fun.
Yeah.
This is just one of many land-based projects that will take place this school year thanks to the territory's new First Nations School Board. The board became fully operational this month in 8 Yukon schools and is open to all students. Teacher Brendan Morfitt says the project reflects the board's ultimate goal of empowering students by incorporating First Nations culture into the classroom.
And this project here, I think, exemplifies that, getting them out hands-on, connecting with nature, seeing how this project ties into, our ecosystems, all kind of blends into what the school board is looking to promote.
The board was created after 2 Auditor General reports found the education system was not meeting the needs of Indigenous students. Teacher Brendan Morfitt says he's seen some students struggle in the classroom, and projects like these are a great way to get them to engage.
We know this, that not every student or child is someone who wants to sit at a desk and open a book and read and do math. There's different styles of learning.
So it's been a really busy 3 weeks, but it all very exciting, and we're supporting as much as we can where we can.
Melissa Flynn is the board's executive director. She's hopeful students will be able to see themselves and their culture better reflected in the classroom as they move through the school system.
We want this year to see connection to community and connection to land. And so those are wherever teachers are at in their curriculum delivery, in their classroom environments. How can we take it one step further in connection to land, connection to community?
For students at Takini Elementary, connecting to the land is just as important as learning in the classroom. Sarah Connors, APTN National News, Whitehorse.
In Australia, Indigenous landowners have found themselves as the winners of a challenge in federal court this week. The ruling prevents an energy company from drilling for gas off of the country's north coast. This decision against Australian oil and gas company Santos Limited is seen as a major win for Indigenous rights. Dennis Murphy Tipakalipa is the traditional owner of the Tiwi Islands. He says the company did not consult with his people.
In circumstances where the drilling EP did not show that Mr. Tipakalipa, others of the MMIP clan, or indeed any of the traditional owners of the Tiwi Islands were consulted, Mr. Tipakalipa claims that NOPSEMA could not have been reasonably satisfied as required by regulation.
The energy company could consult with the traditional owners and apply again for drilling approval or appeal to the full bench at the federal court. Now to California, where an Indigenous woman is on her way to making history. Last week, California Governor Gavin Newsom appointed Dawn Blake to the State Board of Forestry and Fire Protection. If confirmed, Blake will be the first Native and the first woman to ever serve on the board. Blake, who is an enrolled Hoopa citizen and Yurok descendant, has over 20 years of experience in natural resources. That is part of the reason why California tribal leaders applauded her nomination. Yurok Vice Chairman Frankie Myers said in a statement, "With her background in Western science and Indigenous traditional ecological knowledge, Dawn has a comprehensive understanding of California's natural landscape." Up next, Blake's nomination must be confirmed by the California State Senate. And those are the headlines for the ICT Newscast. Last week, the Academy Museum of Motion Pictures honored Sacheen Littlefeather for her life's work. She graciously accepted the Academy's apology for the hostile reception she received at the Oscars in 1973. At the time, the actress refused an Oscar award on behalf of actor Marlon Brando. ICT's senior editor Diana Hunt spoke to Sacheen Littlefeather before the ceremony in Los Angeles. Let's watch.
I wanted to talk to you specifically because the impact that what you did had on Indigenous women, Indigenous young women, and older women, and what the apology means and what kind of message you think that it sends now.
Well, first of all, I never, ever, ever expected to get an apology from the Academy Awards. This is just something of a shock to me personally, and I never thought anything would ever happen like this in my whole lifetime. And it was totally unexpected. I never expected anything like this, ever. And I'm glad that I'm still alive to receive it. I became a nutritionist, a holistic health nutritionist, with a minor in traditional Indian medicine. That's herbology. And I worked in that chosen field, went to a lot of different reservations and gave workshops to Native people. And that's one of the things I did. Then I became a founder and a board member of the American Indian AIDS Institute in the early 1980s in San Francisco. And of course, I worked in hospice with Mother Teresa of Calcutta. So I did a lot of things that held my interest in the health field. And it was working with children who had cancer, leukemia. I don't rarely ever talk about these things. They're very personal, very beautiful to me. But there are many things that meant so much to me. I put a program together called a ropes course with some San Francisco police officers for inner city children who didn't have an opportunity to get out on the wilderness trek. and helped put that together here in the Bay Area and other such programs. Again, these are just personal things that I did that gave me an opportunity to express my interest. I also was a member of the Kateri Tekakwitha Circle and worked toward her sainthood in Rome that happened in 2012. And I actually went there for her canonization with 1,000 other Native American Indian people during her canonization. And that was also something that I had prayed for many, many years, and was very fortunate to be there. So these are a little bit of my interest during my lifetime.
It sounds like you have absolutely no regrets.
No, not at all. I promised myself when I was a young person. Here's a picture of me when I was young and gorgeous back in the day.
Yep.
I'm 75 right now. But when I was young and gorgeous back in the day, I promised myself one thing, that I would never be bored. And I never have been. And I've been far too busy to be looking to see what my neighbor's doing and be jealous or any of that sort of thing. And as a matter of fact, when other Native people or other people do something and they accomplish something, I'm more than happy for them. Because if you're envious of other people, I mean, there's always going to be somebody that's more accomplished than you, that's more gorgeous than you, that's richer than you, that has more things with you. So you're going to wear yourself out being gorgeous and waste all your energy. Just be the best you that you can be.
That was Sasheen Littlefeather. Days after she earned her new title, I was honored to welcome this year's Miss Navajo in the studio. Valentina Klitso introduced herself in her language.
Yat she Valentina Klitso Yinishia. Todachi Ninishlan, but Ahni Bashichin, Tor Hanadashache, Ashin Dashanele, Dislichin Brante Inasha. I'm Valentina Klitso, and thank you for having me here today. I am from the community of Black Mesa, and I'm proud to represent the Navajo Nation.
I want to learn about all of the competitions that you had to take part in to win this crown. Maybe tell us at a high level what kinds of competitions you had to take part in.
So the first competition we took part in was the butchering, and that was harvesting a sheep. And we used that to cook for the dignitaries, the volunteers, and we also gifted the contestants' parents with a sheep leg.
Oh my goodness. And you actually won in the category of Best Butcher. I was talking to a journalist at the ICT newsroom downstairs, and she was saying that that is a really big competition. So I wanted to ask you how you prepared for that competition specifically.
I've been butchering all my life, so that was one of the easiest ones for me to prepare for. But prior to the competition, I did have a lot of rest. That's something I recommend for that competition because it takes a toll on your body.
Yeah, I mean, let's actually talk more about that because it actually spans several days. Maybe tell us, what the high points were for you, because I know you had to attend and give public speaking, and there was just a number of things that you had to do.
So the highlight of the week was the butchering, the traditional food. I really enjoyed the interview questions and also the traditional and contemporary skill and talents.
You also won Best Traditional Food. What did you make?
So we were required to make 5 different things. We had the Navajo tea, the intestine stir fry, the tortilla, the blue corn meal, and also there was one more item.
You're making me hungry here. I wanted to ask you if you had run for Miss Navajo Nation before.
This was my very first pageant, and so my very first time running for Miss Navajo.
And were you surprised by the outcome?
Yes, I was very much surprised because I didn't know what to expect. I'm new to the pageant world, and it was one of the best experiences of my life. And I'm really proud to call Gypsy Pete and Brianna Davis my sisters.
That was Miss Navajo Valentina Klitso. When we come back, an update on voting rights. It wasn't until the passage of the Snyder Act in 1924 that Native Americans were granted the right to vote. Nearly 100 years later, Indigenous people still face many obstacles to fully participating in elections. Derek Beetso joined me in the studio last week. He's the director of Indian Gaming and Self-Governance at Arizona State University's Law School, and he is also a board member of ICT's parent company, Indig Public Media. Let's watch. Lay the land in terms of what kinds of voting rights lawsuits we're seeing right now in Indian country.
Sure, thanks for the question. Right now, you guys mentioned earlier the historic nomination and confirmation of Representative Peltola. In Alaska, during that special election in June, what folks were finding is that a little over 4.5% of all the votes cast were not counted because of small clerical errors that could have been cured had the individuals who submitted the ballots had the opportunity to cure those ballots. So these are things like if I submit a ballot and I forget to sign my signature on it, there's a period of time between when I submit the ballot and when it's actually counted, when some jurisdictions will allow for a cure process. So they'll send it back to me and say I need to sign it, and I can sign it and my vote can be counted. What they found in Alaska is that of the 4.5% of folks whose votes didn't count in Alaska Native villages and places with heavy Alaska Native concentration, it was more around 17%. And so you have the Alaska headquarters of the United League of Women Voters and the Arctic Village Council have filed suit in August to enforce their rights under the Alaska Constitution, which basically says it's a fundamental right to vote. So we'll definitely be watching that. You guys noted that there is a midterm coming up where Congresswoman Peltola will have to go through this all again. And so we're hoping that the tribes and the other plaintiffs are successful in this lawsuit and they'll be able to get a cure process, which will make sure that ballots in Alaska are counted come November, which is 55 days away from today.
Absolutely. I mean, let's jump over to Kansas, where Representative Sharice Davids has also found herself in some legal battles in terms of gerrymandering and, redistricting. In terms of redistricting, we saw so many lawsuits, but what stands out to you there?
Yeah, I mean, I think redistricting, I think what folks need to take away is that what we're finding is that the Native vote is important, right? You look at the 2020 election in states like Arizona and New Mexico and states with heavy, high Native populations, the voters made a huge difference. And I think the states are on notice of that. You mentioned Kansas, but also in Montana, there's laws that were trying to restrict same-day voter registration and also ballot collecting, which happens a lot in and around Indian country. And so the tribes are stepping up, right? In Montana, you have the Northern Cheyenne tribe, you have the Salish and Kootenai tribe, the Assiniboine tribes, the Blackfeet tribes all filing suit in that case. And just in South Dakota, we had another instance. In South Dakota, the tribes, the Oglala tribe and the Rosebud Sioux tribe and the Lakota Law Project filed suit there to enforce their rights under the National Voter Registration Act. What they found there is that the state of South Dakota was not providing voter registration information as required by law to folks that were doing things such as changing their address on a driver's license application, for instance. This Native vote is a huge issue. There's a lot of litigation going on. And I just want to give a shout out to the folks that are doing this work at the Native American Rights Fund, DEMOS, the ACLU, and all the other folks that are doing this work on behalf of tribes and on behalf of Indian country.
Absolutely. I mean, you mentioned a number of tribes in South Dakota, but there's actually a recount happening on the Navajo Nation. Maybe tell us about that.
Yeah, so internally, I mean, tribes are seeing their own issues as well, right? My tribe, the Navajo Nation, just had its election for its president. We had two individuals who were at the top of the primary candidate, who were top of the primaries. And what we found is that folks had challenged those findings, and they're actually looking at what was going on at the individual chapter levels and finding that you have antiquated systems out there, like the actual machines that are counting the ballots, are old and outdated and need to be replaced. And so it's really shining the spotlight of our own infrastructure in Indian country. And under the Navajo Nation Code, it is a fundamental right for Diné people to choose candidates of their choice. But what does it say if the infrastructure that you have in place is not up to par, right? So our nation is wrestling with that right now. I think there are a number of challenges still working their way through the tribal court system, and we're still waiting to see how that turns out as well. But the right to vote is something that's very important. And if anybody listens to this tape takes away anything from this conversation, it's that you have to get out there and vote in November, right?
That was actually going to be my next question, which is if somebody's listening to this interview and is maybe hearing about all of these lawsuits and maybe they're feeling deterred from voting, what is your message for that voter?
My message to that voter is the reason that we have all these lawsuits is to protect your right to vote. And if it wasn't so important, so many people wouldn't be I guess, what's the word I'm looking for? They wouldn't be so intent on trying to restrict your right to vote, right? And so these lawsuits that are putting forward are really trying to put tribes and tribal citizens on this status quo to make sure that they get the same fundamental rights to vote as everybody off reservation. And so it's really important that if you're on a reservation, if you're off a reservation, if you're Native, and if you have a candidate that you support, that you go out there on election day and cast your vote.
That was Derek Beetso. Well, Minnesota is strengthening its relationship with the 11 tribes that share its boundaries. Governor Tim Walz and Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan announced the promotion of Patina Park to Executive Director of Tribal State Relations. She will serve as a direct link between the governor's office and Minnesota's tribal communities.
Well, I think our main priority really is to develop what should this office look like moving forward, as far as where it's located within the system, what is its main priorities, roles, even staffing, how does it interact with the different agencies, since they all have their own tribal liaisons as well, to really formulate a strong office with a mission, directive, and then try to codify it like we codified the executive order last year, making government-to-government relationship and consultation a state mandate for the agencies. So that will outlive Governor Walz. And we'd like to figure out how to do the same thing for the office. And then the office continues to be a policy advisor around tribal affairs for the governor's office. And as we all know, tribal affairs connect to almost every single element of state government. And so ongoing involvement with issues as they pop up to ensure that tribal nations are being considered, that the impact on the tribes is considered at the front end of any action, that when agencies send recommendations or requests to the governor's office, that we're following through to ensure that the tribes were engaged in a meaningful way, and it wasn't just a checkbox of, we called the tribes and that's it. And then, things come up. We are adding a staff that starts this week. I'm very excited. And so they'll serve as a Native American Affairs advisor, and we'll further build what role would they fill as far as policy, as well as working, directly with the tribal government affairs. And it's a work in progress, but it's exciting work. And it really is energizing to work in administration where, the lieutenant governor's an enrolled member. I don't have to do the education component that we all usually have to do when we try to highlight tribal affairs. There's just a basic understanding of it now, and so we can get past that and start moving to actions right away.
Minnesota has made a commitment to missing and murdered Indigenous relatives.
We're excited that we have the first office in the country. It's located in public safety. The executive director, Rudy, is already posting positions to staff up. And so we're talking about what would an advisory council or group look like. She's already engaged in reaching out to law enforcement agencies and kind of looking at old cases. And so I think we have the potential here to kind of lead in this work at a state level, and then to plug into the work that's being done at a federal level, as well as within other states and tribal nations, because this issue isn't limited to Minnesota, and it crosses into Canada, crosses across the country, and of course it impacts our tribal nations directly.
That was Patina Park. Now to South Dakota, where government officials welcomed tribal leaders to the capital to help launch a missing and murdered Indigenous persons initiative. Stuart Huntington has the story.
Members of Rapid City, South Dakota's Wambliska Society traveled to Pierre to sing and burn sage for prosecutors, investigators, and staff at the Attorney General's office, as well as Indigenous leaders from across the state. Attorney General Mark Vargo addressed the gathering.
We are hoping that we can work more closely together to solve the problems that we have together. Our problems do not respect ethnicities or jurisdictional lines. They don't respect lines on the map. They don't respect households. They don't respect the color of your skin. So why should our response be divided by those things?
Following the courtyard welcome, the Attorney General convened a meeting of Native leaders, including longtime advocates for missing and murdered Indigenous women, to advise him as he prepares to hire the state's inaugural MMIP liaison officer.
We need to continue with prevention and awareness. We need to keep getting the messages out for our sisters that are still out there, for our sisters that may be someplace that might be waiting to come home, but they need help. And also, we want to remember the people, our sisters that have already gone back to the spirit world.
In Pierre, South Dakota, this is Stuart Huntington for the Attorney General's office.
And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. For all the latest, visit ictnews.org. From all of us in the newsroom, stay safe, my relatives.
Sometimes you got to take a stand just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run.
The ICT Newscast is produced by Indig Public Media. This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.